Koi? Anyone? Hello, I'm Rachel, this is Missy, and we're Miss Daisy Sewing, and today we are going to work on quilt number 2 of my quilt series. Previously I did a quilt for my niece and it's all jellyfish themed, and this time we're going to do a quilt for my nephew. Now my nephew is 8, so when I say I was surprised at his choice of theme, I really do mean that. I was expecting something kind of cartoony, so was not expecting torii gates and Japanese lanterns. So with that as my guide for this quilt, we're going to bring in all of my sort of favourite sort of Japanese sort of iconography. To start with, I want to work with some origami cranes. So I found this pattern. Full disclosure, I found this on Pinterest. I did try to hunt down the original creator and couldn't find one. But the plan is we're going to have cranes, we're going to have those lanterns, and we're going to have those torii gates. And I would also really like to add in some pagodas if I can find the pattern. So yeah, just join me. Let's make some wishes, I suppose. And I will fill you in as we go on the plan. So I've got here various bundles of roughly colour coordinated fabric, and the yellow here that I'm going to use as my background. As I've already mentioned, I don't know the original artist, so I don't have instructions. I remember from the flamingo that these pieces want to be broken up by the sort of letter. This has not given me a seam allowance, so if I cut into the most obvious section to start with, which is this nice straight line here, there's no seam allowance between these two parts, so I'm going to have to remember to add that. So let's just finish cutting these segments. And I think this side is a mistype. I think that should be C3 because we've got C2 there. Sorry, B3. So we've got C2, C3 here. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to cut along there. Now onto the sewing machine. I find the trickiest part of this is that initial starting point. I've trimmed down the yellow here and then folding along those soon-to-be seam lines, trim back the excess. After that I just pick pieces of colour that should roughly fill that shape, and then sew them together along the seam line. Use a short stitch length that will help picking the paper off later, and also just help secure everything in place a little bit. You then fold back the next piece, trim off your seam allowance and start again. Each time I'm changing colour, I'm making sure that when I fold it over, it's going to fully cover the next square. The origami crane is probably the most famous origami model there is. In Japan, the paper crane is a symbol of peace, love, hope and healing, and paper cranes are often given to someone to wish them well. I am really pleased with these cranes. I think I'm going to do a red border around them. I'm not 100% sure yet. I'm going to wait until I've got more of the quilt put together. All saying that, I do think the red one is my favourite. But nonetheless, I think our next stop is going to be doing the lanterns. For the lanterns, I'm going to use the pattern from Tilda's World. They are the ones who provided the parrot pattern that I used on my mum's quilt for Mother's Day last year. And I know from that they are really well written and well explained. So I'm quite confident that this block is going to turn out just fine. And I want to do a mix of the larger and smaller lanterns. And I think I'm going to use the black fabric I have for like the background, just so that they really pop and give that idea of like a night sky. This quilt is actually turning out to be a little bit of a scrap buster for me, which is really nice because I'm going to use some more of my scraps to give the lanterns different prints. Like in the quilt here, they're fussy cutting and doing some really nice prints for the lanterns, and I want to use that idea on this one. So I'm going to dig out the scrap box again and pick out some nice larger pieces of fabric that are the right size and get cracking on with these lanterns. Whilst this is a scrappy project, it needs quite large pieces of fabric. So the first thing I did was to sort through all of my scraps and pick out the larger pieces that would fit the aesthetic for what I was after. Following that, I used a rough guide I had written out to cut down and trim all of the pieces I would need and stack them as to how I wanted to assemble each of the lanterns. Here's me roughly assembling what all of those pieces are going to look like together. I decided on a grey for the background as I felt a black would look too harsh on this project, and as you can see, it's immediately recognisable for what it is, and I was already really pleased with how this is going to look. And then to the sewing machine. With the exception of the corners on the edges of the lantern, this was fairly easy to assemble. It was literally just strips that I then just stacked. As you can see, it is a production line at this stage, and that's the nice thing when you know exactly how many of something you're going to make, is that you can just repeat the same step over and over. The border really makes a big difference. So I have managed to make this exactly 38 inches, which I'm really pleased with. And I'm going to add an extra row of grey on the top and bottom, just so that these big lanterns have that border, like what we've got between here, because I think that that really does add to the lantern look, having that extra row. So I'm just going to quickly do that, and then we're going to get on to the next square. And that's with the origami birds added. I'm really pleased so far. So it's going to either be the torii gates or the pagodas next. So the next square we're going to do is going to be a pagoda. This wasn't one of the requested items, which was specifically the torii gates and the lanterns, but for me, they really do make me think of Japan. It's a really quite distinct silhouette, and I found a really nice pattern at binartex.com. It's not the easiest written it out, so I'm going to have to sketch up a cheat sheet for making a note of all of the pieces that I need, but that's easy enough to do, so let's just get on with that. I've got here the breakdown of what I need to cut for each of the sections, as well as a template for the top of the pagoda, and I'm just going to use this as my guide to quickly cut 5 sets of the pagodas. Long-term viewers might recognise my sun and moon fabric, and the plan is to do the pagodas, the actual pagoda itself, in the darker fabric, and then I've got the white sort of star contrasting, which I'm going to use for the background. We really are coming to the end of the scraps for this sun and moon fabric, and I'm not going to lie, I think I will be sad to see it permanently leave my stash. I did have to be really careful about cutting this to be as efficient as possible, just to make sure I had enough for all of the pagodas. Here we go. So that's the pagodas roughly put together, and I just need to get them all stitched. There was a lot of pieces to assemble for this one. All of those little triangle edges are made by placing a square over the edge and then folding it over. And then obviously I've had to add all of those side pieces as well, but I think it really pays off. I decided on this sort of dark grey border to go with the pagodas, and I felt they balanced really well with the brightness of the cranes and also those dark lanterns at the very top. So we have a problem with the Torrigates. I cannot find a quilt block pattern that I like. I mean, truth be told, there's not really many of them full stop. Loads of beautiful quilts with Torrigates, but really struggling to find patterns for the actual Torrigate. My plan is going to be to try and design my own block. I've never done that before, so it's going to be a learning curve for us all. But I think we can manage. It's a fairly simple shape, looking at some pictures of them. So let's just get on with it and see how we do. I did struggle on the maths on this. Whilst I understand seam allowances, when it comes to stacking multiple pieces side by side or one on top of the other, I was struggling to work out exactly what I would need. In the end, I just kind of went with numbers that felt intuitively right and just ran with vibes for this. So I've got my rough sketch here with the dimensions. It's going to be 13 inches wide, so I'm going to make 6 of them. And the idea is going to be that I'm going to have like a perfect row of Torrigates of these all side by side by side by side to fill the whole distance, rather than sort of making blocks, which is what I've done with the other ones. And I think that'll just be a really fun little difference for it. I adore Torrigates, partly because they remind me of my favourite day of my Japanese holiday back in 2016. It was a delayed honeymoon that my husband and I had, and we were in Miyajima, which is the island of all of the friendly deer. But also just because of what they represent. They are these bright red gateways between the mundane world of the humans and the sacred spirit realms. And we saw them everywhere whilst we were in Japan. They were at the gateways to shrines, they were at entrance points to like the botanic gardens and things like that. And they are just utterly iconic. And it was absolutely wild to me to see this blend of this old culture that's still so deeply respected, mixed with their modern cultures, especially in Tokyo, where we had these huge skyscrapers, but also these beautiful shrines that looked like they hadn't been touched in centuries. I had officially started to hit time crunch on this project, so I've just realised that I never filmed the row assembled in and of itself, so you're just going to have to wait for the reveal at the end of the video. Whilst I was assembling the Torrigates, I had the embroidery machine working way hard, making me a whole shoal of koi fish. I just whipped up this design on the embroidery machine software, and it was another opportunity to use up a bunch of scraps. Everything's come together really well. I've got all of my strips made here, so those are my koi fish, Torrigates, and so on. And I've stacked them up, and I'm about 4 inches shy. So my plan is I'm going to make a red border with this here to go between each set and then around the outside of the quilt, and that will just keep it sort of cohesive and put together. I got really lucky with a charity shop find with this sort of Japanese quilt bedsheet here, and I've already cut this down to sort of 80 by 80, and that's going to be the backing, so we're going to keep that nice and easy. At this point we were on the home straight. I added that red band in between each of the sections and assembled as I went. This quilt got really big really quickly and was quite unwieldy at some points to assemble. It was then time to make the sandwich and get all of the layers put together, which makes me realise that I just need a bigger living room. And then after that it was sewing on that border. So that's me got the border on, so now I need to do the other one, get that neatly folded down and hand stitched to finish off the inside. Overall, really pleased with how this is all coming together. It's actually slightly too big for my room, so I've got to be a bit creative with how we're lying this down, but that'll go like that. Get a lovely little red border. So yeah, I am really pleased with how this is all turned out. Onto the hand stitching. This quilt was an absolute delight to make. It's one of the most technical quilts I've made in a long time, and I really enjoyed the challenge that gave me. as well as sort of pushing me out of my comfort zone to design my own blocks. It was a lovely excuse to go through all of my old holiday photos from my honeymoon in Japan, and I really hope that one day my nephew gets across there to make his own memories and see these iconic things himself in person. I think it's really fair to say that I have gone from being really uncertain about the theme of this quilt to absolutely loving it. I think the colours are wonderful, the iconography is spot on, and overall, I'm really pleased with it. If you've enjoyed this, there's one more in this little mini quilting series, so until then, cheerio!